Hello, welcome back to our coverage of the AWS Summit 2018 here in London. We're live from the Expo at the Excel Centre in Docklands. This is the AWS Launchpad on twitch.tv/AWS. For the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be recapping this morning's keynote and discussing some of the content that Amazon CTO Werner Vogel's covered during the opening session of day 2 here at the event. And I'm going to introduce my co-host first of all. I'm Ian Massingham, by the way, on the AWS Technical Evangelism team. And I'm joined by Adrian Hornsby, also from the AWS Technical Evangelism team, and Rick Harvey, also from the AWS Technical Evangelism team. So you've got 3 evangelists for this first session. We're going to be, as I just said, discussing some of the content that was covered during this morning's first session. So first question that I've got, Adrian, is what was the highlight of the keynote this morning for you? What do you think was the best announcement or best launch there?
Of course, that's a great question. For me, I'm a huge fan of databases services. And there's been a new launch this morning, Backtrack, yep. And I think it's great. It's kind of rewinding your database to a point in time to be able to have a better recovery of your data.
Great, I've got the blog post for this launch up on my laptop right now, so maybe the crew can just share that on the stream. And you can tell us a little bit more about the service while I show our viewers what's on stream. My other monitor, just click that.
Sure, so okay. It's kind of feature of Aura to backtrack or kind of turn back in time. You can also see it as an undo option. It's kind of if something happens in the database and you just want to roll back, that's what you can do. You have to enable backtrack when you start your Aura cluster. You cannot have backtrack once your cluster database is already launched. So it's for the moment from the beginning. But after that is pretty much managed option for you, and I really like that. It's kind of the same feature that we have also in DynamoDB, which is a point-in-time recovery. Yep. So I think it's great. It gives options for different type of databases.
Use cases that were covered in the keynote this morning. Obviously, there's a kind of recover from wrong finger syndrome where you inadvertently wreck your database
I've done that a couple of times
by pushing a release which does something bad to it, as well as this idea of wanting to get a development or test environment into a specific state before you run tests. So you could have a test-driven development cycle where you need to get your database into a particular consistent state so that you can run tests and look for a known state at the end of that that period. So that's also I think a really interesting use case for that kind of feature as well.
Absolutely, and I've seen so many outages created by loss of databases that I think it's the more options to preserve data and to be able to recover, the better.
Cool, great stuff. So let's quit the share then, please, if we can, so I can take a look at my notes. And we'll talk about some of the other things that we covered in the course of the keynote this morning. Just let that go away.
No.
Okay, so the other major feature, of course, of AWS keynotes, whether that's reInvent or AWS Summit keynotes, is customer participation. And we had 3 interesting but quite different customers up in the keynote this morning with Werner. Yep. The first of which was an AI startup from here in the UK, which is focusing on health tech. Yep. Did you see that? Did you see the video demo? What do you think of that?
So Babylon Health, right?
Yeah.
No, I think the demo was great. It was conversational interface matched together with machine learning to be able to help kind of understand or diagnose diseases based on symptoms. And I think the demo was really cool, and I think it's a fantastic way of both using conversational interface and machine learning. I think those use cases, I think we're going to see a lot more in the future.
I've been doing a bit of work on conversational interface development myself over the first
demo.
part of the year in my little rating bot demo. And one thing that I thought was really cool about the demo that Ali Parser showed, the CEO of Babylon during the keynote, was this idea of custom models. So they've got their conversational interface, but the actual, it's like an expert system, right? So the health expert system that they've built using machine learning obviously is something which is domain specific. So they're using a combination of different services from AWS as well as the Amazon Alexa voice service on the Echo platform to deliver that. So some parts of the service are served by higher level abstracted services like the Alexa voice service, and then other parts of the service are served by custom machine learning inference models that run directly on these low-level primitives like the P3, which is quite an interesting way to blend different parts of the architecture together, right?
Yeah, and this is what I love with the cloud. You know, you have access to high-level services to, for example, do kind of conversational interfaces or even recognition to do image face recognition, voice like Poly, and then you also have access to low-level, and you just stitch them together to create some very cool stuff. And compared to 10 years ago, you know, stitching things together would have taken like years.
If you could successfully do it, it would have taken years. Yeah.
And now people in startup can do this. I love that because it's like, the kind of access to technology for every developer, and that's what Werner said. You know, that we are democratizing access to machine learning and AI, and I think that's tremendous.
I know probably some of the people that are watching the stream are slightly earlier in their careers than the three of us are that are standing behind the sportscaster style desk here today. We're all kind of older guys, I guess, and you can kind of. I'm from Yorkshire, as you might know, so you can kind of draw a parallel here to a famous joke from the Monty Python series where they talked about, you try and tell the kids of today how hard it used to be to build software back in the early days, back in the day, and do you know what? They won't believe you.
That's right.
How difficult it was. But actually the cloud really just changed a lot of things when it comes to the development processes we use, the way we build architecture to support both new ideas, but also to scale those ideas up as and when they're successful, or turn them off when they're not successful. It's really pretty different today to how it used to be, actually.
It's such a leap forward. Like when you think about, simply like even for databases, right? When you have now multi-master, we also have multi-master for Aurora, and what it is to actually replicate data across several AZ or even several regions for DynamoDB.
Well, not just data, but replicate access points.
That's
so you can actually enter the data fabric in these different locations.
And I think it's when I was trying to do this 10 years ago, it was taking time for full time for developers, and now we don't have to do it. We can focus on the business logic. We can focus on our application, and I love that.
We talked a little bit about machine learning in the context of Babylon, and we're going to return and talk about other customers that we featured in a second. But the other thing that Werner talked about, of course, was SageMaker. And right after this slot, one slot after this slot, so we're at 1300 UK time, we're going to have a deep dive session here on Amazon SageMaker together with one of our machine learning evangelists, Julian Simon. So if you want to learn more about some of the SageMaker topics that were covered in the keynote this morning, make sure that you're watching the stream at 1. We're also going to have a guest during that segment from hotels.com as well, which is one of the other guest speakers that we had in the keynote earlier. So maybe we can just dig into that in a second. But before we get into that, hotels.com came on stage, Matt Fryer from hotels.com came on stage after a big segment on WellArchitected. And I know you used to be a solutions architect, Adrian, so can you talk a little bit more for viewers on the stream that might not be familiar with that idea? What is the WellArchitected Framework? Is it a product, is it something else, and how do customers use it?
So it's not a product, right? It comes from the experience of solutions architect at AWS. We realized eventually after many years that customers were asking very often the same questions. How do we deploy securely architecture? How do we scale? How do we build reliable systems? And we gathered kind of a bunch of people to answer this question in the form of a kind of document, right? Which is a white paper now, a well-architected white paper, which you can download, and there's actually even a full section on the website, on the Amazon website, dedicated just for the well-architected framework. We call that the framework. And it's across several pillars: reliability, there's security, there's, can you help me? I don't remember all the pillars. Performance,
optimization, performance, efficiency, cost optimization, and one more,
and so and then operational excellence is the last pillar that we had it. So those are kind of questions that you can ask your team or your company, and then try to help steer the discussion, conversation around those topics. How do we build reliable systems? How do we have a security in place, and all these kind of things, right? So everyone can download it.
From my point of view with that, I've done some webinars on the security pillar recently on this, and it's really, really useful. Normally when you get these white papers, it's actually quite dry and to take all that information in. The well-architected documents are written so well, and it's just really easy to digest and get on with it, so highly recommend them. And we've got partners who also do well-architected reviews that you can reach out to as well.
Although AWS Solutions Architects have done thousands and thousands of those with customers now, so if you are an AWS customer and you want to run through this process, you can either contact your account team and your solutions architect can come out and help you do that, or do it virtually on a call or on a webinar, or you can get one of our partners, or even pick up the documents yourself and do your own self-assessment. The questionnaire framework and the white papers that define these 5 pillars in detail, they're all downloadable freely from the AWS website. So if you are interested in that, I'd suggest taking a look at that. Throughout the day today on Twitch, we're taking questions from you on the stream. So if you do have any questions, you can enter them into the chat, and Rick, who's on stage with us here, will be representing the voice of the Twitch viewer during this segment.
He's not a bot.
He's not a bot, he's a real person. Make sure that you have an interesting nickname on Twitch so that Rick has to read it out on the stream. And don't hide too much stuff in there that we shouldn't be saying, that's all I'll say. So you mentioned security there in the well-architected framework, and there's a lot of coverage in Werner's keynote around security topics, and this is something that we've been talking about consistently throughout the summit program this year, with security is everybody's job, encrypt everything, these kind of topics that we think are really important for customers to adopt in order to drive security in the cloud to a higher level than what can be achieved in the vast majority of on-premises owned and operated IT. So give us a perspective on security in the cloud. When you're talking to customers about security in the cloud, what do you hear from them? What's their sort of hot topic areas? What are some of the important things that we've done recently with new services to improve security at AWS?
Well, at least for me, the first thing when I talk with customers about security, I always say that security should not be discussed after. It should be actually job one, or the first thing that you discuss with your team, or it's an integral part of the discussion, right? You don't create services, you don't create application without thinking security at the same time, right? You shouldn't think about security at the end and say, oh, now we need to
change
add
everything
security
in order to add security.
No,
and
especially it's super easy now because most of the service, if not all the service, AWS allows you to do encryption in transit and encryption at rest. Right? And as Werner said, at least everyone should use encryption at rest. There's no now reason why you should not use encryption at rest, because if you use encryption at rest and you own the master keys, which you can on AWS, you are the only one who can access your data, right? And we've seen a lot of cases where people were wondering, or the many questions are from customers, do we own the data, right? And if you do encrypt your data at rest and you use a master key,
you own the data, you obfuscate the data so no one else can see what the data is. Exactly right, yeah.
Especially relevant with GDPR coming.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So GDPR was a big topic in the keynote as well this morning. And AWS announced several weeks ago that all AWS services meet the compliance requirements for GDPR. So if you're a customer here in the EU region, which you may well be given the time zone of this broadcast, or you are, of course, managing or processing or storing data that relates to EU residents, then you can talk to us about GDPR anytime. We've got full compliance across all of our service offerings. We've also got teams here at AWS that are working on helping customers achieve GDPR compliance for applications that are built on top of the platform here. So if that's a concern for you or a priority for you, it's late in the day. The effective date is the 24th or 25th of May, so about a month out, less than a month out actually. Yep. But if you still need help with that, then do speak to your team from AWS and we can help you out with that. So the next thing I want to do is move on and talk a little bit in more detail about the hotels.com segment with Matt Fryer.
It's such a cool use case. Right?
Yeah, so do you want to describe for the audience what was discussed, what he covered? I thought it was a really interesting use case as well.
Right, so hotels.com is part of the Expedia group, right? Yep. And they are using AWS for quite a few things. And one use case that they talked about today is being able to be more relevant for their customers, which a lot of customers take pictures of hotels or surrounding, and they want to be able to choose the best picture to show to people that are going on the web page, right? So that they can see a nice picture instead of, for example, a toilet photo versus a swimming pool photo, right?
But if you want to see a toilet, you can search for a toilet, right?
But if you book a hotel, the first thing you want to see is a beautiful image, right? So to give you a sense of that it's great, right? And it makes total sense.
It's actually a feature that I've used, so I won't say who, but I used to use an alternative booking site and found one of the problems here. There's a hotels.com person just off camera here waving at me, by the way, if you're looking while I'm looking sheepishly cheapest about this, so used to use an alternative site, and you couldn't do a lot of, you'll know this, working in the gym.
Yep.
It's a new thing for me. When I go to a hotel, the first thing I actually check out is
gyms.
what weights do they have, what equipment do they have, and on some other hotel booking sites, actually really difficult to do that. You've got 1,000 pictures, and they're not categorized or organized except at the highest level, which is kind of, useless really, when all you want to do really is check out, does that hotel have more and a better gym facility than this other hotel over here? So that is, I think, a really valuable feature. It's one I actually use, so kind of embarrassing disclosure there.
No, it's great. No, working out is great. It works out great for you, right? No, I love the way the use case is done. They use AI to be able to figure out what's the best features to categorize them, and it's great. And they are great customer. Great.
The other thing they were talking about is performance acceleration. So image metadata, responsiveness in mobile search. When a user asks for those images of the pool, the images of the gardens, or we want to select the best image to really tempt a customer to make a booking. Obviously surfacing that in a timely way is really important, right? So they're using other AWS service for that as well, like DynamoDB and something called DynamoDB Accelerator, or DAX, which provides an in-memory cache for Dynamo. So they get really snappy application performance, no latency, no dissatisfied customers, and it really helps customers, encourages customers to complete those transactions and make those bookings, right?
Yeah, and I love like how easy or how more and more customers are using AI and machine learning in their use cases. A few years ago, it was actually quite unusual to have a customer go on stage and talk about machine learning, because it was not so easy, right? It was not easy to build, train, and deploy. Now with, for example, SageMaker, you can do this. You have the P3 instances to train.
Access to masses of computing power when you need it to run those model training activities.
And hotels.com has tens of millions of images, right, to classify and to sort them in terms of relevances. And I think those are, it's now almost like too easy, right? It's like...
you still need to know what you want to know though, so you've got to have the problem frame before you can start, but once you've done that, the resources that you need to do the model training, retraining, and of course deploy those models are available.
That's right.
Again, it wasn't like this when we were kids, right? It was a lot harder to do this stuff.
No, it's fascinating, the use cases and what people are coming up with. I just love it, it's great.
And then the last board topic area that was covered was compute. And Werner here was talking about actually quite a broad spectrum of different services. So regular EC2 instances for VM-based workloads, containers, and of course serverless with AWS Lambda. So do you want to give a quick perspective on the difference between those two things for the viewers on the stream? When might we use those different options? And what kind of options exist on AWS in that middle area for running containers in the cloud? I'm looking at our ECS t-shirt.
we got a container guru here.
Yeah, so we've got a few sessions coming up on containers, and particularly Fargate later, which is, if you want to think about it, it's a way of no infrastructure for you to manage. We take all that heavy lifting away from you. So you just give us a container, we'll place it on the right size instance, we'll scale it, and we'll make sure it's highly available. That's all handled for you. So the use case for that is if you don't need to do anything special on the host, and any kernel tweaks or have other programs running side by side, use Fargate. If you do need to do special things on the host, drop into having ECS and EC2 instances on there. Containers versus serverless, I'm trying to get our room to say which way we're split in the room, because it's normally a polarizing topic. But
I don't think it's...
I don't either.
I think there is space for everything.
I think they need to be used
together. There's no hammer to do everything.
Remember, you can fire containers on Fargate from event-driven events that you gather out of Lambda, so you can use the Fargate API together with appropriate IAM roles in Lambda, receive an event in Lambda, and fire a container to conclude the event. And this is a common pattern for customers that have long-running jobs that exceed the 5-minute execution cap within Lambda, right? You can spool those out and use them for those long-running ETL or processing jobs that you've got. And still respond to events, so you've got the best of both worlds. That's real hybrid cloud.
That's right, exactly. And the AWS batch service actually has been around for some time, now 2 years already.
It's container-based,
container-based execution, to do event-driven kind of processing, and that's great as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything longer running than 5 minutes, containers.
Yeah,
but serverless, I love it.
Yeah, exactly.
I've done quite a few projects in it, and it's been a development miracle, basically. It's so quick to produce and deploy, especially using things like SAM. And we've now got the new SAM CLI command line out that came out 2 days ago.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it in
cool.
a bit with Etar as well.
Excellent.
We've got a deep dive on running Kubernetes on AWS coming up right after this session. So as soon as we get off stage at 12:25, off this sportscaster style stage, and we'll say that again, at 12:25 this afternoon, quick 5-minute break on the stream with some video of the expo while we switch our cast around, and then we'll have Kubernetes on AWS deep dive right here on twitch.tv/AWS at hour. So that's coming up in just 10 minutes from now.
10 minutes.
Okay, so the last thing to talk about is probably the last customer that was on stage during this morning's keynote, and it's actually not the first time that we've had a major bank featured in an AWS event, but it is interesting, I think, to see the way in which usage of AWS inside some of these big enterprises has changed over the course of the last few years. I've been here about 4.5 years, and I'd say that when I started at Amazon and at AWS, usage of AWS inside the large enterprise tended to be new things. They were kind of building new projects in the cloud, but over the course of that period, things have really changed a lot, and big enterprises using AWS today, right at the core of their IT, right at the core of their businesses really, both to re-architect and rebuild existing apps, even migrating them and just lifting and shifting them to the cloud.
Yeah. Or said there was 70,000 database migrated now.
Yeah, 70,000 databases moved to AWS over the course of the last 2 years since we launched DMS. Yeah. So with HSBC, they're actually talking about something which is sort of at the intersection of old and new. They were talking about bringing data out of the enterprise and using it for new apps. So can you talk a little bit about what they built, Adrian, and how they built it? Did you catch the end of the keynote? Is the first question.
Actually, I was not in that.
Aha, okay, it's down to me then.
So it's down to you.
So what they were talking about was an application they've built for pushing notifications to customers about important events related to their financial life. So things like, I've just received my salary in my bank account, I can get a push to my HSBC mobile app in my phone telling me that my salary has been deposited, or they can use it in a different way, like detect that I've just arrived in a new country, detect that I haven't purchased a travel insurance product, and push, do you want to buy travel insurance, into my app. And they can do that on the basis of context, where I am, where I've come from, what my purchase history is. So it's merging together data that exists inside the enterprise mainframe environment, bringing that into the cloud and using that for context-based notifications to their customers. And the whole thing is driven with AWS Lambda, Kinesis, DynamoDB, and API Gateway. So these are real cloud-native services on AWS, native AWS services that HSBC are using to build modern apps that integrate with their existing enterprise data stores.
It's
really interesting architecture.
Like banks like this being able to create applications in the cloud.
It is, and they obviously have to,
regulated environment.
Yeah, exactly. They have to overcome a lot of regulatory requirements, meet a lot of regulatory requirements, overcome regulatory challenges in order to do that. And it's a really good indicator of how I think attitudes and perceptions towards the cloud in big companies in regulated industry have changed over the last few years. Really interesting thing to wrap up on.
More and more banks, more and more insurance companies like Liberty Insurance or Capital One, and now it's just
running those big applications in AWS. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this segment. I'll say thank you to my co-host. Do we have any questions from the stream, Rick?
Not really. People are talking about Lambda and how they can use it, and interesting uses with RDS, and that's Cheese on Toasty, who has brought that out. One of the more pronounceable names on this Twitch feed at the moment.
Awesome. Great stuff. So we'll be back on twitch.tv/AWS from the AWS Summit in London on the AWS Launchpad in around about 5 minutes with Kubernetes on AWS, how to run containers in the AWS cloud using that really popular open source project. Have your questions ready. We'll have a moderator here again in the next session to make sure that your questions can be answered live on the stream. So thank you, and thank you Adrian and Rick. We'll be right back after this footage of our show. See you soon.
Thank you, Twitch.